all right.
I was a theater major in college and I always worried that there'd never be an audience. And this morning I was like, I don't know if anybody's coming. And here you all are. So great. We're going to begin our service with a little bit of tech. Can we check and make sure, is anybody on Zoom?
Yeah.
Can they hear us? Can you put a thumbs up? Okay. Okie doke. And I see the top of Celeste's head. So, oh, is that? Oh, right. Okay. Hi, David. He has a lovely head, doesn't he? And if you guys could turn around to the camera and wave. I like this gesture. It's kind of our new ritual. So we might feel apart, but we're really together. And for those of you on Zoom, if you need to speak with the chat people or with the tech people, you can use your chat function down in the middle of the screen, which opens up a chat window on the right side. And also you can click the CC for closed captionings. Our call to service this morning begins with the words of John Wellwood. Forget about enlightenment. Sit down wherever you are and listen to the wind singing in your veins. Open your heart to who you are right now, not the saint you are striving to become. Our music is with some barking.
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream
so much. Welcome. Good morning, members, friends, and visitors to the Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River, where our mission is to support, inform, and inspire those who seek spiritual and personal growth and a more equal and just community. Glad you're with us this morning, along with our folks on Zoom. My feed, my name is Miralee Tausig. I'm your lay leader this morning. And I didn't quite, when I was ordering the service, realize that you all would be singing before I had a chance to tell everybody how excited we are that you all are singing. So Sambarkan, which is three names in one. I was wondering this week, I was like, what does Sambarkan mean? Maybe it's another language, but it's their three names. And they're joining us and offering our music. And of course, we're lucky for Philip, always, who will help us with the accompaniment. And we have another return engagement, Reverend John Ames, who's been with us, I think, almost every year, except of course, the COVID years.
Several times.
Reverend Ames is a native of Mississippi and went to the University of Mississippi, which he reminds us is Old Miss, where he became active in the early days of the civil rights movement in the South. And that led to a decision to go to the Union Presbyterian Seminary in Richmond, Virginia. He also graduated from Duke with a PhD in American history and religion. If you want to quiz him later, that's fine. He gets around. He's been a pastor in Bethesda, Maryland, Lyndhurst, New Jersey, Louisville, Kentucky, East Hampton, New York, where he retired as pastor emeritus of the First Presbyterian Church. And he served at the Chestertown Presbyterian Church from 2008 to 2020. So if you have any history quizzes or you want to know anything about those cities, he's available after service. We have an offering basket in the lobby. We don't pass it around yet with our COVID protocol, but it's lonely and it likes if you pay attention to it as you're leaving. If you're attending via Zoom, there's a donate button on our website. If you're visiting for the first time, some of you, there's a guest book out in the lobby that we would love you to sign. And two other announcements. One, I'm really proud. We've already said this once, but we got a few late donations. Our March outreach offering, which is for the bus trip to, where is it, Phil?
Montgomery, Birmingham, and Atlanta, civil rights bus tour.
It's a civil rights bus tour. And we raised $27.38 for that. That's 1 month outreach, and that is really well done. And I'll just remind you that this month's outreach is for something else we love. We love our youth. We also love our river, and we're trying to offer enough that we can sponsor one of the pollution monitoring sites on the Chester River that they do during the summer. So it's a really great cause this month as well. Also, Jane gave me an announcement, which I haven't read yet. If I do this right. Our 2022 silent auction, online auction is now live and can be accessed through our webpage via the tab auction links. Be sure to register for online bidding, which will open this coming Friday, April 15th at 7 a.m. and close on Saturday, April 30th at 7 p.m. Everyone on our database list will also receive a standalone email with links to the online silent auction and to our service auction catalog. Ooh, that sounds interesting. Look for these links in our next reflections as well. Our silent auction preview and cash and carry sale for lower price items is Thursday, April 28th here at UUCR from 1 to 7 p.m. So I assume it's a drop-in kind of thing. Okay, so Thursday, April 28th for the hot tickets, the hot but affordable tickets. And join us here on Saturday, April 30th at 6 p.m. for a final silent auction bidding and our live service auction. I think that's all our announcements. So I will ask Reverend Ames to read with, and you will help him while we hold up our sign and light our chalice.
And-
I'm gonna do this while lighting the chalice. You're gonna hold the sign. And I'm gonna light the chalice where you're standing. I didn't know I was gonna get to dance this morning.
And together we say, we light this chalice as a symbol of the light within all creation. We light this chalice for truth. May the search for truth be with us always. We light this chalice for love. May the love for others be strong in our hearts.
Our opening words this morning are from one of my favorite poets, David White. The theme this month, which I don't know if we've talked about, is from our Unitarian Universalist folks, is awakening, which it's a late spring, and I feel as if we're just awakening in the last few days. Here's David White's poem. In that first hardly noticed moment in which you wake, coming back to this life from the other, more secret, movable, and frighteningly honest world where everything began, there is a small opening into the new day, which closes the moment you begin your plans. What you can plan is too small for you to live. What you can live wholeheartedly will make plans enough for the vitality hidden in your sleep. To be human is to become visible while carrying what is hidden as a gift to others. To remember the other world in this world is to live your true inheritance, for you are not a troubled guest on this earth. You are not an accident among other accidents. You were invited from another greater night than the one from which you just emerged. Now looking through the slanting light of the morning window toward the mountain presence of everything that can be, what urgency calls you to your one love? What shape waits in the seed of you to grow and spread its branches against a future sky? Is it waiting in the fertile sea, in the trees beyond the house, in the life that you can imagine for yourself? Join using your hymn books that are just in front of you with us and rise in body or spirit for hymn number 98. And now Reverend Ames will offer us a scripture reading.
Reading from the second book of Samuel, beginning at the 5th chapter and the 1st verse through the 6th chapter and the 23rd verse. That's quite a lot more scripture than you're used to. So I'm going to abridge the story somewhat. This is an account of, and I apologize for having to hold this. The rest of me is 23, but my eyes are much older than that. So I have to hold this close. This is the account of King David being acknowledged king of Israel and of his conquest of Jerusalem and making the city of Jerusalem his capital, and of his bringing the Ark of the Covenant into the city. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "Look, we are your bone and flesh. For some time while Saul was king over us, it was you who led out Israel and brought it in. The Lord said to you, 'It is you who shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and who shall be ruler over Israel.' So the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 40 years. The king and his men marched to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who said to David, 'You will not come in here. Even the blind and the lame will turn you back,' thinking, 'David cannot come in here.' Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, which is now called the city of David. David said on that day, 'Whoever would strike down the Jebusites, let him get up to the water shaft to attack the city.' David occupied the stronghold and named it the city of David. And David became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of Israel, was with him. Then the war with the Philistines continued, and David repulsed an attack on Jerusalem, and the text continues. David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. David and all the people with him set out and went from Baal to bring up there to the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. They carried the ark of the Lord on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abidim, who was on the hill. David and all the house of Israel were dancing before the Lord with all their might, with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. David danced before the Lord with all his might. David was girded with a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. This is the end of the reading from Samuel. David is, as you know, attributed as the author of many of the Psalms. And I'm going to read one of the most familiar Psalms, one that many of you will know, the 23rd Psalm from the King James translation. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is the end of the reading of the psalm.
This is the time when we share our joys and concerns and our acknowledgements of the heart. One of my joys is that you can come up here without a mask now. If you have a joy or a concern, we invite you. And of course, I will be lighting a candle for each joy and concern. And before you come up, I'll just remind you that we continue to light a candle every week for those we have lost in the COVID pandemic and those who stand on the front lines and care for them. It is an immense sacrifice that I think very few of us understand. And we also light a candle this week for the people of Ukraine and all who suffer under war. I invite you to come on now. Well, I have a great joy. I'm a grandmother. My son and his girlfriend had a baby girl on Thursday, and they came home from the hospital yesterday. So tomorrow I'm going to go and be with them.
My joy is that Jim, many of you have been asking about him, will be coming home on Tuesday from the hospital, and it's been a long haul. And I keep thinking of the goodness in our lives, and however God presents to you in whatever beautiful form and energy, we are so grateful. And I just wanted to share that with you.
My name's Mark. I can't come up front, but I do have a joy also. And I lost my cat a week ago. He ran out the door, and obviously I couldn't find him. And I really did think he was gone for the whole forever. And I prayed, and I said, God, let my cat return healthy and happy again, and make me happy. And I said, if he does, I'll go to church.
I also have a joy inspired by yours. I've been having a very large project in my life that gets extremely busy and stressful and very exciting. And in the last few weeks, it's gone sort of into a, what I would call, looks kind of like a failure. And I thought it was going to be a roaring success. And I wasn't quite sure how to manage that. And yesterday I just decided to sit down on the couch with my dogs. And they don't care whether my business goes well. So this is for all of the animals that make our lives so joyful.
All right.
Two things never fail me. One is the animals and the other is music. And we have some barking again. Some barking?
No, I'd like to introduce our singer.
He would like the three names. Oh, I don't know their names, so they're going to introduce themselves. Thank you, Harry.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I've had the pleasure of being here several times by Philip's invitation, and it's always a joy. And I'm especially happy to have with me Lester Barrett Jr. and Jerome McKinney. And together our names make some barking. Some for Somerville. I'm Karen Somerville. Bar for Barrett. And we decided to leave the Mac out, but McKinney, Jerome McKinney, some barking, some barking. Yes. Lester.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead
Precious Lord, take my hand and lead me on, and let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn, I am sad through the storm, through the night. Lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me
I'm very pleased to be here for, I don't know how many times, but several. I never know what to talk about here. I remind myself that if you wanted a typical Presbyterian sermon, there's one every week, 100 yards down the street. And so I know you don't want that. Today, you're getting a lot more religion than you may think it's a month supply or 6 month supply with some barking, and it's wonderful to be able to share with them their music, and my preaching will stand you a long way. take you a long way. And I never do, as I say, I never know what to talk about here. But the last several times I've talked about Old Testament hero stories, Elijah, Ruth, I can't remember some of the others, but that seems to go well. And so today, David. Almost nobody in the Bible gets more coverage than King David. We follow his career from young adolescence to old age. He takes up 55 chapters of the Old Testament, from the middle of the first book of Samuel to the end of 2 Samuel. I would guess, without checking, that only maybe Moses and Jesus get more coverage than David does. Perhaps Paul does, of course, but Moses and Jesus and Paul, though they're very important characters, the stories about them also involve other people and other events. The stories about David are just about David. David, like Abraham, like Moses, is depicted in almost ideal terms, as Moses is the lawgiver and Elijah is the prophet. David is the king, the model for all later kings, none of whom ever came up to his ideal. In time, as Israel's fortunes waned, David became the source of hope. The promise of a new king was made by many of the prophets, a new ideal king, greater even than King David. Many people acknowledged Jesus as this new David, the King of the Jews. Today is called Palm Sunday in most Christian churches. This remembers the day when the people of Jerusalem waved palm branches and shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David," as Jesus rode into the city. This was precisely what they had in mind. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. This is exactly what the people shouted when David brought the Ark of the Covenant into his new capital of Jerusalem. This is not an accidental identification. It's not a coincidence. This is the primary focus of the messianic hope. David is one of the few people in the Bible whose physical features are described. David was a very handsome man. When the sculptor Michelangelo wanted to depict male beauty and was prohibited by the artistic conventions of the time for showing Greek gods, he turned to David for inspiration. Nudity in church was not a problem, but anything that looked like Apollo would have been a problem. David was an aggressive and successful warrior, but he was also a fair and just ruler. He founded an empire, or at least he consolidated contentious tribes into a sort of a kingdom that was later remembered as an empire. But he was also a poet and a musician, and he's remembered as the author of many of the Psalms. He's a prodigious sexual athlete, but he was also sensitive with male friends. The biblical historians were very honest. David was a hero who is described in laudatory terms, but his faults are also described. The story of Bathsheba is included in the Bible and preserved by theologians and historians so that we will never think more highly of David than we ought to think. The story of David and Bathsheba is told in excruciating detail. David saw Bathsheba in the women's ritual bath, and he summoned her. He, being king, gave her no choice, but we are not told that she was unwilling to go. She became pregnant, and the plot thickened, much like Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. David engineered the death of Bathsheba's husband, Uriah, by putting him in the front line of the battle. And at the death of Uriah, David married Bathsheba. But the story has an interesting development. The prophet Nathan appeared and denounced the king for his sin before the Lord. This is no absolute ruler who is above criticism. The prophet had the duty and the responsibility to speak truth to power, and so he did. And David acknowledged this fact by accepting the rebuke of the prophet Nathan. He could have ordered Nathan killed, as Henry VIII ordered Thomas More killed for doing much the same thing. But David accepted the rebuke and the punishment that the prophet Nathan said was coming upon him. First, the child which Bathsheba was carrying would die before birth. Second, David's reign would consist of constant warfare. And third, David would not be allowed to build the house of the Lord. The temple, which was promised to house the Ark of the Covenant, would be built by his son Solomon. The Lord did forgive David, but the punishment still remained. Bathsheba became pregnant again and bore Solomon, who became David's heir and successor. Solomon, and therefore Bathsheba, are the ancestors of Jesus, the new David. This story is important for the veracity of the historical record. The history is honest. It is not sanitized to make the heroes look greater than they were. It's also important that as an illustration of the forgiving nature of God. David was punished for his sin. Forgiveness did not negate punishment and responsibility, but the forgiveness was real, and so was the punishment. David also had failings as a father. The story of Absalom is one of the most beautiful and pathos-filled anywhere to be found in human literature. It tells a story of tragic adolescent rebellion and of stupid parental rigidity. David loved his son Absalom more than his own life, but he could not tell him so. David did nothing but carp and complain about his son's bad behavior, which, to be fair, did include organizing a rebellion. But in my opinion, parents of teenage boys should read the story of Absalom every night. O Absalom, Absalom, my son. Though there are some additions, most of the story of the David stories reflect a theological tradition that makes the kingship of David a symbol of the reign of the Lord in Israel. The David stories were written by a contemporary and compiled soon after during the reign of Solomon. One authority says that this writing is of such remarkable historical quality that the anonymous author, who is a single person and not an editorial committee, deserves to be called the father of history. One of David's most important and original theologians, this author regards the establishment of the kingship as a divinely ordained blessing, the salvation of Israel. We first meet David as a young boy from way down south, a sort of a backward part of the country that was not expected to produce national leaders, the sort of Little Rock of Israel. He was brought to the court of King Saul as a young musician, and he soon became a favorite member of the court circle. He was a close friend of Saul's son, Jonathan, and married Saul's daughter, Michal, with whom he was deeply in love. Saul was a charismatic leader who had been crowned king over the objections of the prophet Samuel. At first, he was a very effective leader, but his reign ended in dismal failure. There are many reasons for this, but a chief among them was his severe emotional instability. Saul was what we would call manic depressive, swinging from tremendous frenzies of excitement to deep melancholia and paranoia. As King Saul sank deeper and deeper into mental illness, David became more and more popular with the religious and political leaders, as well as also with the common people. His youthful exploits, such as the affair with the giant Philistine Goliath, were still remembered and were exaggerated as they were told around campfires and corporate boardrooms. David's popularity, along with his good looks and musical ability, and Saul's increasing paranoia, set the king out to kill his son-in-law. Warned by Jonathan, David fled the court, summarizing a long and complicated story, which is the main plot of the Richard Gere film, David. David became the leader of a rebel faction that was fighting against both King Saul and also their common enemy, the Philistines. The Philistines were a Canaanite people who occupied much of the land in Israel, including most of the seacoast, especially the modern area of Gaza. They had been fighting there for at least 3,000 years. David's popularity grew as Saul's declined, and it became clear that David was a much more effective fighter against the Philistines than Saul was. The war went on for several years. Eventually, the decisive battle was joined, resulting in a complete rout of the Hebrew army. Saul's 3 sons, including Jonathan, were killed, and Saul himself took his own life, which, by the way, is one of the few suicides in the Bible. The only other one that I can think of any importance is Judas Iscariot. This debacle left Israel at the mercy of the Philistines, and the tiny nation might have disappeared completely if the military and political success of David had not triumphed. The history gives the story in great detail, but we'll just quickly summarize it. David was proclaimed king of Judah by popular acclaim and was anointed by the old priest in the city of Hebron, which is the site of the burial place of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. He then set out to conquer and consolidate the other tribes into a single kingdom. It's important to realize that this had never existed before. Israel had never had any kind of political unity. It was merely a consolidation of various tribes who were united only by their allegiance to a common God whose name was Yahweh. The historians say that Saul's problem was that he never realized that the nation and the religion were combined, never acknowledged God as the center of the Israelite state. David created the nation Israel, just as Moses was the founder of the Hebrew religion. After consolidating his authority among the various squabbling tribes, David had to turn to the final eradication of the Philistines, and the struggle took place in a plain just south of the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a Jebusite stronghold, high on an almost impregnable, it's called a mountain. You and I would not call it a mountain. It's called Mount Zion. It's a well-defended, difficult to conquer place. David was able to conquer it by sending some men up a water shaft that ran from a spring at the base of the mountain to the top. And you can still see that spring. The pool at the top was called, in the time of Jesus, the Pool of Bethesda. And anyone who goes there can see it. David's first action after conquering Jerusalem was to establish it as both the political and religious capital of the kingdom. This was symbolized by his brilliant decision to move the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. It had been neglected for generations, as had the desert religion of Yahweh, but the old priest had kept the faith alive. The Ark was brought into the city with great ceremony and rejoicing. It was the climax of David's quest for kingship and the high point of his reign. It's also the dramatic high point of the Richard Gere film, though the emphasis of the movie is more on David's brief dancing costume than it is on the theological significance of the Ark of the Covenant. No one, in fact, knows what an ephod is, but in the imagination of the film writers, it was a very brief costume indeed. Through the Ark, David sought to link his newly created state with Israel's ancient order and become its legitimate successor. He declared declared God to be the patron of his state and proclaimed the sacred institutions of the past. This is of critical importance to the whole story. For if David had merely consolidated political power without restoring the worship of the Lord, Israel might have endured as a nation, but Israel would not have existed as a religion or a people. As it was, the nation existed for only 2 generations, David and Solomon. It then split and struggled along for a few hundred years later as nothing more than an insignificant blip on the screen of Middle East history. It was the faith of Israel, symbolized by the Ark of the Covenant, that endured and that makes the story significant. It makes no earthly difference to us in this year of grace, 2022, whether the Hebrews or the Philistines or the man in the moon won this war in the year 1000 before the Common Era. What makes the story worth telling this year is the conviction that it was God who established the kingship of David, the same God who had called Abraham out of Mesopotamia, the same God who had stuck with Jacob through his Middle East misadventures, the God who preserved the Joseph tribe from famine in Palestine and slavery in Egypt, and who led them under Moses through the wilderness. This is the God who chose Isaac over Ishmael, who chose Jacob over Esau, who chose David over Saul. And Christians believe that this is the God who, in Jesus Christ, broadened the covenant from a single people to one consisting of every race and nation. This is the God who constantly wrote and is constantly writing new chapters in a single story entitled God Consolidates His People and Effects His Will. Thank you.
You join me in our second hymn, and before we start, I'll just let you know that after the hymn, we're going to have our extinguishing of the chalice. And then Philip is going to lead us in a sung benediction, which is Go Lift It Up, which you guys all know. So we don't have to worry about the hymnal. And the last thing before we go home is some Barkin will sing for us again. So let's rise for hymn number 61.
And our closing words together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again.
I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you. Oh, my soul, rejoice. Take joy, my King, in what you hear. Let it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you. Oh, my soul, my soul, my soul rejoice. Take joy, my King, in what you hear. Let it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. Whoa, whoa, sweet, sweet sound. Lord, let it be.
Let it be a sweet,
Sweet, sweet sound. Lord.
Let it be a sweet,
Sweet, sweet sound in your ear.
in your ear.
Let it be sweet. Ooh, Lord, when I cry out your name, when I call on you, Lord, let it be sweet. When I'm on my bended knees, when I cry, Lord, what's I may do to be saved? Oh, Lord, I need you. I need you right now, Lord. So when I call you, let it be sweet. Let it be sweet in your ear, Lord. In your ear.
Nobody has to follow that.